June 16, 2015, 10:53 a.m., Trump Tower, New York City. Donald John Trump, 68 years old with perfectly blonde hair and an unmistakable confidence that borders on swagger, strides onto a makeshift stage constructed in the marble lobby of his signature skyscraper. His custom-made suit reflecting the morning sunlight streaming through 40-foot windows that overlook Fifth Avenue's most prestigious retail addresses. Behind him hangs a massive American flag, while ahead of him, hundreds of supporters, journalists, and curious onlookers have gathered to witness what many assume will be nothing more than another publicity stunt from a real estate mogul known more for his television presence than his political mille. In exactly 37 minutes, this speech will transform Donald Trump from a celebrity businessman into the most unexpected political phenomenon in modern American history, launching a campaign that will systematically dismantle political conventions, defy electoral predictions, and ultimately capture the presidency through a combination of populism, persuasion, and strategic disruption that will reshape the American political landscape forever. But as he approaches the podium, prepared to announce his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination, Trump carries within his DNA and his demonstrated approach to business the accumulated ambitions, strategies, and cultural influences of ancestors whose own journeys from European poverty to American prosperity have been building toward this moment of political breakthrough for more than a century. What ancestral forces created the mind that could transform reality television into political power? What bloodlines produce someone capable of challenging established political institutions with nothing but a microphone, a Twitter account, and unshakable belief in his own abilities? What hereditary gifts of entrepreneurial instinct, media savvy, and political ambition flowed through the genealogical streams that created Donald John Trump? To understand the man who would become the 45th President of the United States, we must journey backward through the generations that forged his extraordinary combination of business acumen and political theater. Through the German villages where his paternal ancestors learned the harsh realities of economic survival, through the Scottish Highlands where his maternal forebears developed a stoic resilience and community solidarity that would prove essential for weathering American life's inevitable storms. Through the New York real estate world, where these separate immigrant traditions merged and evolved into something uniquely suited to the opportunities and challenges of modern urban development. For Donald Trump was not simply an individual who happened to possess unusual business instincts. He was the culmination of centuries of immigrant determination and entrepreneurial adaptation, the living embodiment of Germanic precision and Scottish perseverance that would transform not just the real estate industry, but the entire American political system. Donald John Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Queens, New York, the fourth of 5 children born to Fred Trump and Mary Ann McLeod Trump, whose marriage had united 2 distinct traditions of immigrant success that would prove perfectly complementary in shaping their son's approach to business, politics, and public life. Fred Trump, born on October 11, 1905, in the Bronx, New York, had inherited from his father's family a German tradition of meticulous planning, engineering expertise, and unyielding determination that stretched back through generations of craftsmen and entrepreneurs who had carved prosperity from challenging circumstances across 2 continents. Fred Trump's father, Friedrich Trump, had been born on March 14, 1869, in Kallstadt, Bavaria, Germany, into a world where economic opportunity was limited and social mobility was nearly impossible for anyone born outside the small circle of established merchant families and nobility. Kallstadt was a small wine-producing village in the Palatinate region, where generations of Trump's ancestors had worked the same plots of rocky soil that stretched across the western slopes of the Palatine Forest, coaxing grapes from vines that had been planted by their great-grandfathers and tended by their fathers with the kind of systematic care that had been refined over centuries of agricultural experimentation and local tradition. The Trump family of Kallstadt could trace their roots back to the early 16th century, when Hans Trump had been among the Lutheran families who had migrated from other parts of Germany to settle in the Catholic-ruled Palatinate region, seeking religious freedom and economic opportunities that had been denied to them in their original homelands. Hans Trump, born around 1520, had brought with him not just his family's Protestant faith, but also their traditional knowledge of agricultural techniques, wine production, and small-scale commercial activities that had enabled them to establish themselves as successful farmers and tradesmen in their new location. Hans Trump's son, Mitchell Trump, born around 1550, had inherited from his father both his religious convictions and his practical skills, establishing the family as one of the more prosperous wine-producing families in the Karlstadt region. Mitchell's success had been based on his ability to combine traditional winemaking techniques with innovative approaches to crop management and wine storage, creating products that had been sought after by merchants and nobles throughout the Rhineland. His marriage to Anna Kessler around 1575 had brought together two established Karlstadt families whose combined expertise had encompassed not just viticulture, but also the commercial networks necessary for selling their products throughout the region. The Trump family's prosperity during the late 16th and early 17th centuries had been built on their ability to adapt their traditional skills to changing economic conditions. As the demand for Palatinate wines had fluctuated with political developments and commercial opportunities throughout Europe, the family's survival through the 30 War, which had devastated the Palatinate region between 1618 and 1648, had required the same combination of adaptability and determination that would characterize their American descendants, as they had been forced to rebuild their vineyards, restore their houses, and re-establish their commercial relationships after periods of military occupation and destruction. Johann Trump, born around 1680, had been among the Trump family members who had recognized that agricultural prosperity in the post-war period would require not just traditional farming skills, but also innovations in marketing and distribution that could connect their local products with broader markets. Johann had established commercial relationships with merchants in Mannheim, Frankfurt, and other major German cities, creating distribution networks that had enabled the Trump family to weather economic downturns and to benefit from periods of commercial expansion. His understanding of market dynamics and his ability to build long-term business relationships had established patterns of commercial thinking that would prove valuable to his descendants in their American ventures. The marriage of Johann Trump to Elizabeth Becker around 1715 had brought together two Karlstadt families whose combined resources and expertise had enabled them to expand their wine production and commercial activities beyond what either family could have achieved independently. Elizabeth Becker was born around 1690 to a family of craftsmen who had specialized in the production of wine barrels and other equipment necessary for the wine trade. The Beckers' technical knowledge of woodworking and metalworking had complemented the Trumps' agricultural expertise and commercial connections, creating a family business that had integrated production, processing, and distribution into a vertically integrated operation that had maximized their economic efficiency and market control. Christoph Trump, born around 1725, had inherited not just his parents' business expertise, but also his family's tradition of religious conviction and community leadership that had made them respected members of Karlstadt society throughout the turbulent 18th century. Christoph had served as an elder in the Lutheran Church and as a member of the local council, demonstrating the family's commitment to civic responsibility and moral leadership that would be transmitted to subsequent generations. His understanding of the relationship between business success and community welfare had created a business philosophy that emphasized not just profit maximization, but also the responsibility of successful merchants to support local institutions and to maintain the social stability that made commercial activity possible. The family business had faced significant challenges during the French Revolutionary Wars, when the Palatinate had been occupied by French forces, and when traditional commercial relationships had been disrupted by political changes and military requirements. Christoph's son, Johann Friedrich Trump, born around 1755, had been forced to navigate the complex political environment created by changing French and German control of the region, developing diplomatic and business skills that had been essential for survival during periods of political uncertainty. Johann Friedrich's ability to maintain business relationships with merchants from different political factions had demonstrated the adaptability and political sophistication that would characterize his American descendants. The marriage of Johann Friedrich Trump to Katharina Appel around 1785 had united two Karlstadt families whose combined resources had enabled them to expand their wine business and to establish themselves as among the most prosperous merchants in the region. The Appel family had brought additional expertise in banking and credit management that had complemented the Trumps' agricultural and commercial knowledge, creating financial relationships that had provided access to capital for business expansion and had enabled them to weather economic downturns that had destroyed less sophisticated competitors. Friedrich Trump, Donald's grandfather, was born on March 14, 1869, into a family that had achieved remarkable prosperity through generations of careful business management and strategic adaptation to changing economic conditions. By the time of Friedrich's birth, the Trump family had established itself as one of the most respected and successful wine-producing families in the Karlstadt region, with extensive land holdings, sophisticated production facilities, and commercial relationships that reached throughout Germany and into adjacent countries. However, the political and economic changes that had swept across Europe during the latter half of the 19th century had created new challenges and opportunities that would ultimately motivate Friedrich Trump to abandon his comfortable German life and seek his fortune in the New World. The unification of Germany under Prussian leadership in 1871 had brought fundamental changes to the political and economic environment of the Palatinate region, as the new German Empire had implemented policies that had favored the interests of the northern German states over those of the southern regions that had been incorporated into the empire through conquest rather than voluntary association. The wine industry of the Palatinate had been particularly affected by imperial trade policies that had opened German markets to competition from other European producers, while simultaneously restricting access to the colonial markets that had traditionally provided outlets for German wine exports. More importantly, the social and cultural changes that had accompanied German unification had threatened the traditional values and community relationships that had sustained the Trump family for generations. The emphasis on industrial development and military expansion that had characterized the new German Empire had created social pressures that had valued urban commercial success over rural agricultural prosperity, military service over civic responsibility, and individual achievement over community cooperation. For a family like the Trumps, whose prosperity had been built on traditional values and long-term relationships, these cultural changes had represented fundamental threats to their way of life and their children's prospects. Friedrich Trump's decision to immigrate to America in 1885, at the age of 16, had represented not just personal ambition, but also recognition that opportunities for advancement were limited for young people from traditional rural backgrounds in the changing environment of modern Germany. His journey to America had been financed by the sale of his family's wine inventory, and had been undertaken with the understanding that he would send for his parents and siblings once he had established himself sufficiently to support their relocation. The journey itself, which had required travel from Karlstadt to Hamburg, passage across the Atlantic Ocean, and travel from New York to his ultimate destination in the Pacific Northwest, had been a remarkable test of determination and adaptability for a young man who had never before traveled beyond the borders of his native village. Friedrich Trump's initial years in America had been spent in the logging camps and mining towns of the Pacific Northwest, where his German engineering skills and his meticulous approach to problem-solving had made him valuable to employers who were developing the natural resources of the region. He had learned English through daily interaction with workers from many different countries, and had developed the commercial and networking skills that would be essential for success in the highly competitive environment of American frontier capitalism. His ability to combine technical competence with business acumen had enabled him to accumulate capital more rapidly than his immigrant competitors, and had provided him with the resources necessary to establish his own enterprises. The Klondike Gold Rush of 1896 had provided Friedrich Trump with the opportunity that would transform him from a successful immigrant worker into one of the most prosperous entrepreneurs in the Pacific Northwest. His recognition that gold seekers would need food, lodging, and various services had led him to establish a restaurant and hotel operation in the boom town of Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory, where his understanding of supply chain management and customer service had enabled him to serve a clientele that included not just individual prospectors, but also major mining companies and government officials. His success in the Klondike had provided him with the capital and the reputation necessary to expand his operations throughout the region. The marriage of Friedrich Trump to Elizabeth Christ around 1902 had brought together his business expertise with her family's traditions of social service and community leadership that would prove essential for building the stable business relationships necessary for long-term success. Elizabeth Christ had been born on April 10, 1892, in Kallstadt to a family that had been among the most respected Lutheran families in the region, with a tradition of civic service and religious leadership that had made them natural leaders within their community. Her father's work as a church administrator and her mother's involvement in charitable organizations had provided her with an understanding of the importance of community relationships and social responsibility that would influence the family's approach to business and public life. Elizabeth Christ had emigrated to America as a teenager, joining her brother and sister who had previously established themselves in New York City, where they had found employment and had begun to build the networks of relationships that would be essential for immigrant success in the urban environment. Her marriage to Friedrich Trump had occurred during a period when he had been expanding his business operations from the Pacific Northwest back into the eastern United States, establishing himself in the real estate development business that would provide the foundation for his family's subsequent success. Fred Trump, Friedrich and Elizabeth's son, had been born on October 11, 1905, into a family that had already achieved significant economic success, but that had maintained the immigrant work ethic and family solidarity that had enabled them to accumulate their wealth. Fred's childhood had been marked by constant exposure to his parents' discussions of business opportunities and challenges, creating an environment where entrepreneurship and financial management had been considered normal subjects of family conversation rather than adult concerns that were kept separate from children's activities. Fred Trump's education had been focused on practical subjects that had prepared him for success in business, including accounting, engineering, and legal principles that had been essential for understanding the complex regulatory environment that governed American real estate development. His father's success had provided him with access to educational opportunities that had been unavailable to most immigrants. But Fred's performance in school had reflected his family's tradition of academic achievement and his personal determination to excel in whatever pursuits he undertook. The Trump family's expansion into New York City real estate during the 1920s had represented a natural evolution of their business activities, as the booming economy of the decade had created unprecedented opportunities for residential development and property management. Fred Trump's work with his father and uncle had provided him with extensive experience in all aspects of the real estate business, including property acquisition, construction management, sales and marketing, and the financial engineering that was necessary for large-scale development projects. His understanding of the relationship between government regulation and business opportunity had made him particularly effective at navigating the complex bureaucratic environment that characterized urban real estate development. Fred Trump's marriage to Mary Ann MacLeod in 1936 had brought together the Trump family's German-American business tradition with the MacLeod family's Scottish traditions of resilience, community solidarity, and moral conviction that would prove crucial in shaping their children's approach to success and service. Mary Ann had been born on May 10, 1912, on the island of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, to a family whose roots in the harsh environment of the Scottish Islands had created traditions of hard work, frugality, and mutual support that had enabled their survival through centuries of economic challenge and social adversity. Mary Ann MacLeod's family could trace their Lewis Island origins back to the 18th century, when they had been among the families that had been resettled during the Highland clearances that had systematically evicted Scottish Highland families from their ancestral lands to make way for sheep, farming, and other more profitable forms of land use. The MacLeods had been among the clans that had resisted these evictions through legal challenges and organized resistance, but ultimately they had been forced to abandon their traditional lifestyle and to adapt to new economic conditions that required them to develop new skills and new strategies for survival. The harsh environment of the Scottish Islands had created communities whose survival depended on cooperation, mutual support, and the development of practical skills that could provide income in an economy that offered limited opportunities for individual advancement. The MacLeod family's expertise in fishing, sheep farming, and craftsmanship had enabled them to maintain their economic independence, even during periods when other families had been forced to emigrate or to accept employment in conditions that were less favorable than their traditional independence. Their understanding of the relationship between hard work and survival had been transmitted to their American descendants through the practical lessons of daily life and through the oral traditions that had preserved their family history and values. Mary Ann's father, Malcolm MacLeod, had been born around 1885 on Lewis to a family that had maintained its Scottish language and cultural traditions, despite decades of social pressure to abandon their ancestral customs in favor of the English language and British national identity. Malcolm's parents had been among the families that had chosen to maintain their Gaelic language and Presbyterian religious traditions, even when such choices had made social and economic advancement more difficult. Their commitment to cultural preservation had reflected not just personal preference, but also an understanding that cultural identity provided essential foundations for community solidarity and individual dignity. Malcolm MacLeod's marriage to Mary Macpherson around 1910 had united two Lewis Island families whose combined traditions had created a family culture that emphasized education, religious faith, and community service as the foundations for individual success and social responsibility. The Macpherson family's expertise in Gaelic literature and Presbyterian theology had complemented the MacLeod family's practical skills and community leadership, creating a household environment where intellectual curiosity was encouraged and where academic achievement was considered essential for individual advancement. Mary Ann MacLeod's education had been conducted in Gaelic medium schools that had provided her with not just academic instruction, but also cultural knowledge and moral guidance that had prepared her for leadership roles within her community. Her fluency in both Gaelic and English had provided her with communication skills that would prove valuable throughout her adult life, while her understanding of Presbyterian theological principles had provided her with moral frameworks that would influence her children's approach to ethical decision-making and social responsibility. The decision by the MacLeod family to emigrate to America in 1930, during the worst year of the Great Depression, had represented not just economic necessity, but also the confidence that their combination of skills and values would enable them to succeed even in the most challenging economic environment. The family's emigration had been financed through the collective savings of multiple family members, and had been undertaken with the understanding that their priority would be to establish themselves sufficiently to enable additional family members to join them. The journey from the Scottish Islands to New York had required not just economic resources, but also social networks and information that had enabled them to navigate the complex process of immigration and settlement. Mary Ann's arrival in New York City in 1930 had coincided with the worst economic conditions in American history, but her combination of skills, determination, and family connections had enabled her to find employment as a seamstress, and eventually as a domestic worker for families who had maintained their employment even during the Depression. Her work ethic and reliability had made her a valued employee, while her cultural knowledge and communication abilities had enabled her to build relationships that would prove crucial for her family's subsequent development. The marriage of Fred Trump to Mary Ann McLeod in 1936 had united two immigrant families whose combined resources and traditions had created the foundation for one of the most successful real estate dynasties in American history. Fred Trump's business success had been built on his systematic approach to property development and his ability to identify market opportunities that had been overlooked by more established developers. While Mary Ann's management of the household and her involvement in community organizations had provided the social stability and cultural grounding that had been essential for maintaining the family's reputation and relationships. The children born to Fred and Mary Ann Trump had inherited from both sides of their family tree a combination of business acumen and cultural values that would prove crucial for their subsequent success in America's competitive economic environment. Their first son, Fred Jr., born in 1938, had inherited his father's business interests and had initially been expected to take over the family real estate business. But his personal struggles had led to a pattern of behavior that had made him unsuitable for leadership of a complex enterprise. Their second son, Donald, born in 1946, had demonstrated from an early age the combination of confidence, determination, and strategic thinking that would characterize his approach to business and politics throughout his adult life. Donald Trump's childhood during the 1950s and early 1960s had been shaped by his father's success in the New York real estate market and by his mother's involvement in community organizations and church activities that had provided him with exposure to both business practices and social lore responsibility. The family's increasing wealth had enabled them to provide Donald with educational opportunities and social experiences that had prepared him for success in America's competitive academic and business environments. But the family's maintenance of middle-class values and work ethic had prevented them from developing the kind of excessive privilege that might have undermined their children's motivation and character. Fred Trump's business philosophy, which emphasized systematic analysis of market conditions, careful management of construction projects, and strategic development of relationships with government officials and community leaders, had provided Donald with a practical education in the mechanics of business success that had complemented the theoretical knowledge he had acquired through formal education. The family's approach to problem-solving, which emphasized persistence, adaptability, and the importance of maintaining good relationships with key stakeholders, had created a business culture that valued both individual achievement and collaborative success. Mary Ann Trump's approach to child rearing had emphasized the importance of independence, responsibility, and respect for others, creating a family environment where children were encouraged to develop their own interests and abilities, while also being held accountable for their performance and their treatment of others. Her Scottish heritage had contributed to the family's understanding of the importance of hard work, frugality, and the development of practical skills, while her immigrant experience had provided her with an understanding of the challenges and opportunities that characterized American society. Donald Trump's education at the New York Military Academy had provided him with discipline, structure, and exposure to leadership opportunities that had developed his natural abilities in organization, communication, and strategic planning. His subsequent attendance at Fordham University and his transfer to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania had provided him with formal business education and access to networks of successful business people and academics. who would prove valuable for his subsequent career development. The real estate development business that Donald Trump had inherited from his father had been built on systematic analysis of market conditions, strategic acquisition of properties in emerging neighborhoods, and development of residential and commercial projects that had provided housing and commercial space for thousands of New York families. Fred Trump's approach to business had emphasized careful financial management, quality construction, and the importance of maintaining positive relationships with tenants, neighbors, and government officials, which had created a reputation for reliability and fairness that had been essential for long-term success in the competitive New York real estate market. Donald Trump's transformation of his father's business into a global brand had involved not just expansion into new markets and development of new products, but also the development of personal brand marketing that had made his name recognizable throughout the world. His understanding of media attention and public relations had enabled him to build recognition and influence that had far exceeded what would have been possible through traditional business development alone, creating opportunities for expansion into entertainment, licensing, and other industries that had capitalized on his celebrity status. The development of Trump's personal brand had involved systematic cultivation of media relationships, strategic use of public appearances and promotional events, and the creation of narrative frameworks that had presented his business activities and personal characteristics in ways that had generated positive public attention and increased market value for his various enterprises. His understanding of the relationship between media coverage and commercial success had been one of the most important factors in his transition from traditional real estate development to global brand management and celebrity marketing. The business failures and successes that Donald Trump had experienced throughout his career had provided him with practical experience in crisis management, financial restructuring, and strategic adaptation that had been essential for developing the resilience and problem-solving abilities that would later characterize his approach to political challenges. His experience with bankruptcy proceedings, legal disputes, and public criticism had taught him the importance of maintaining legal and financial strategies that could weather unexpected challenges, while his successful projects had demonstrated the value of careful planning and systematic execution. The personal relationships and social connections that Donald Trump had developed throughout his business career had provided him with an understanding of the importance of networks, influence, and reputation that had been crucial for navigating the complex social and political environment of New York, real estate, and entertainment. His ability to build relationships with successful business people, media personality, and political leaders has enabled him to expand his influence and to access opportunities that would have been unavailable to someone with less extensive social connections. The decision by Donald Trump to enter politics in 2015 had represented not just personal ambition, but also the recognition that his combination of business experience, media skill, and political outsider status provided him with unique qualifications for addressing the economic and social challenges that had characterized American society during the early 21st century. His understanding of how to use media attention and public relations to build support and influence had been particularly valuable in a political environment where traditional political skills had been increasingly insufficient for addressing voter concerns about economic change, immigration, and social disruption. As Donald Trump had approached the podium at Trump Tower on June 16, 2015, to announce his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination, he had carried within his personality and his approach to challenges the accumulated influence of all those ancestral traditions that had been building toward this moment of political breakthrough. The German engineering precision that had enabled his great-grandfather Friedrich to succeed in frontier America had been transformed into Donald's systematic approach to business development and strategic planning. The Scottish resilience that had enabled his mother Mary's family to survive centuries of economic hardship had been adapted to Donald's approach to dealing with criticism and setbacks, while maintaining focus on long-term objectives. The immigrant determination that had characterized both the Trump and McLeod families had been manifested in Donald's understanding that American political opportunities were available to anyone with the courage and determination to pursue them, regardless of their background or previous experience in politics. The business acumen that had been developed through 4 generations of Trump family real estate development had provided him with a practical understanding of economic policy and management principles that had given him credibility with voters who were concerned about economic stagnation and declining opportunity. The media skills that Donald Trump had developed through his involvement in entertainment and promotional activities had provided him with the communication abilities necessary for connecting with voters who had been increasingly alienated by traditional political rhetoric and who were looking for candidates who could express their concerns in language that reflected their own experiences and values. His understanding of how to use storytelling, repetition, and emotional appeal to generate public attention and support had been essential for building the political coalition that would ultimately win him the presidency. The political outsider status that Donald Trump had cultivated throughout his business career provided him with credibility among voters who were dissatisfied with traditional political leaders and who were seeking candidates who could challenge established political institutions and practices. His experience as a successful businessman who had not been a career politician had provided him with a narrative framework necessary for presenting himself as someone who could solve problems through practical approaches, rather than through political compromise and bureaucratic procedures. As Donald Trump began his campaign announcement speech on that June morning in 2015, he had not just been announcing his candidacy for the presidency, but had been activating a political coalition that had been building through decades of cultural and economic change in American society. The frustrations that he had identified with traditional political leadership, economic stagnation, and social disruption had reflected the experiences and concerns of millions of Americans who had felt increasingly marginalized by political and economic developments that had benefited established elites while leaving ordinary citizens with fewer opportunities for advancement and success. The political movement that Donald Trump had launched with his 2015 campaign announcement had represented not just his personal ambition, but also the culmination of centuries of immigrant success stories that had demonstrated the possibilities for individual advancement through hard work, determination, and strategic thinking. The Trump family's journey from a German wine village to an American real estate empire provided a template for immigrant success that had inspired generations of Americans to pursue their own dreams, despite obstacles and setbacks that might have discouraged less determined individuals. The business and political achievements that Donald Trump would ultimately accumulate would represent not just individual success, but also the flowering of ancestral traditions that had been built on systematic analysis, persistent effort, and strategic adaptation to changing circumstances. Each victory, whether in real estate development, brand management, or political competition, would demonstrate the influence of family traditions that had emphasized both individual achievement and community responsibility, both strategic planning and practical execution, both personal success and social contribution.